Meaning you cannot sell the land in Israel for forever, meaning unending, an unending sale, unlimited. Why can't you? Kili oretz. Because Hashem says, the land is mine. All you people are, you're only tenant farmers, and the contract between the tenant farmer and the landlord, that initially when the land was divided, when the Jews came into Israel, that land itself, the contract is the tenant farmer has it forever. And he has a right to sublet his property for 49 years. But when the Jubilee year comes, the property has to come back to the one who's actually the tenant, which is the original person who received it. So therefore, that person, it's like, you have a set sublet clause in the contract. You can only sublet it for a certain period of time. 49 years, yes. Less than 40, more than that, you cannot. Why? Kili horetz, because the land is mine, Rashi. Al teira beinchabo, she'ena sheloch. You don't have to feel that you're being compromised, because actually the field was never yours. The land is mine. Because all you are, you're strangers and dwellers together with me. That's the reality. So if you live in Israel, it's very interesting. We said, what is the value of the Shemitah year? It should be Shabbos L'Hashem. That you live in an agricultural society. 6 years you work that land day and night, except for Shabbos. The 7th year comes, the land must remain fallow. All the produce is ownerless, regardless that you've created it and it's due to your sweat equity and your financial investment. Doesn't make a difference. Torah says it's ownerless. Everyone has a right to go into that field to take it. So God says, so what is being communicated? Factually, because that was the agreement. You're permitted to be there without any payment. The payment is every 7 years, the produce and whatever that field produces is available to all my subjects. My humanity, they could go into the field. Regardless of what you believe, but that's the reality. What about now you want to sell the fan? Personally, something, it's not worth my while. It's too painful. I want to sell it, and I will sell it, just get rid of it. You can only sell it for 49 years. Because again, that the land is yours to work and everything, you're only a tenant. And when you sell it, as I said, that you're subletting it to a third person. The sublet contract can only be for 49 years. Because again, what are we hammering home? What are we communicating? Kili oretz. Because you yourselves are only tenant farmers. You're gerim v'soshovim, atem imodi. Now let's stop for a moment. Let's say you don't live in Israel. All these restrictions, anything you create, anything that's yours is yours. Anybody takes it without permission is a thief. You could sell that field, unconditional sale. You could transfer it from your domain to someone else's domain. In Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel, whatever you possess at every level, it's movable, it's fixed property. When you demonstrate ownership, you truly own it. So in terms of one's perception of himself, what is he? He is the master. In Israel, in Eretz Yisrael, Hashem says, I will never allow you to forget who the master is. So the way the laws are structured, it's built into the law that there's a certain reality of life which allows you to be continuously cognizant, never to forget who the master is. Whether it's the 7th year, regardless that you've created it, you have to leave it ownerless. Whether you want to sell it, you can only sell it for a certain period of time. Because again, what's being communicated? Kili horetz. The land is my land. And what about the purchaser? Person buys a slave. When the slave is an infant, a Canaanite slave, it's his chattel. What happens when after 49 years pass? He was raised, he's been part of the family for 49 years. the Jubilee comes, he leaves your domain, regardless of the slave's attachment to the family, or regardless of your perception of the reality that he's yours. You own him. Goes back to the original owner. Because a slave has the same status as fixed property. It's based on psukim. Just as land goes back, the slaves go back. They go back to the original masters. What about if a person has an Eved Ivri? An Eved Ivri initially could only be sold for 6 years. You cannot sell yourself more than 6 years. What happens after 6 years? The Hebrew slave says to the Bezdin, Ohavtias Adoni, I love my master, I love my wife, and I love my children. Although the woman's not even Jewish. She's not, halachically, she's not his wife. The children are not his children. But this is what he says. So what do we have? It says in Mishpatim, they put an awl through his ear, through the cartilage of his ear, and says, Avodo Olam. He remains a slave until Yovel. When Yovel comes, he reverts back, he returns back to his family. So again, but the master has that Jewish slave as almost like he's his chattel. His children, he dictates his life. He gives him a Canaanite woman to breed children for him. Comes the Jubilee year, he's out. Regardless of what you believed. Well, your children had the same service. Doesn't make a difference. Again, so what's always being continuously communicated? Hashem is the one who determines what is and what's not. But all this cognizance, or all these landmarks or signposts, to always remind you that's only in Eretz Yisrael. So when we speak about Golus, when we speak about going into exile is more than just because you're under somebody else's dominance. It's also when you're in exile because the laws of Eretz Yisrael don't apply automatically. You're out of touch. Part of exile is being out of touch with Hashem. It's not only being under somebody else's mastership. Since the laws don't apply, all the benefits of being in Eretz Yisrael are not there to remind you of who you are and your perspective, what you're supposed to think. But it's very simple. If when you're in Eretz Yisrael, you don't abide by the laws. So therefore, the reminders are not reminders. You behave as if the land is yours. You violate the Shemitah. You sell the land as you choose to sell the land. And you don't abide by the law. So therefore, being in Eretz Yisrael is not providing that level of cognizance. If that's the case, you know something? I'll put you out. So just as in Eretz Yisrael, the laws didn't pertain to you in terms of what you chose to behave, you know something? If that's the way you chose to behave, I don't need you to be in the land and violate the laws. I'm going to put you out of the land. At least you won't be violating the laws. Although you don't have that cognizant, you don't have the signposts, doesn't make a difference because in Eretz Yisrael you didn't have the signposts because you didn't abide by the law. Now, there's certain laws which benefit the seller. When a person sells a piece of property, let's say a house in a walled city, he has a right to redeem that house after a year. If you sell a field or a piece of property in an open city, you have 2 years to repurchase it, although it was not part of it was not written in the contract. That's what Torah says. That the seller, because the reason why the person sold the field, as it says, a person falls on hard times, and he has no choice. He sells his property. And a relative of his had the means, and he wanted to redeem the property to bring the property back into the family. We're talking about it's a family heirloom. It's part of the original property that was given to the family when the land was divided. And he sold it because he had financial difficulty. A relative of the family is able to come and redeem it, and the buyer has to relinquish the property when that relative pays the value that he paid for it. And if you take a look at Rashi, and the buyer cannot refused to give it back. The ishki lo yelo goel. What about the person that had no relatives who could come up with the money immediately to redeem that property? Visigo yodo. And he himself was able to come up with the means to repurchase the property. Umotzik de guloso. V'chishe v'shnei mimkor v'eshiv sa'odif lisha shemocha lo v'shav lachuzoso. He has a right to buy back the property, and he'll make a calculation in terms of how many years the person used it and how many years. Let's say a person bought the field for 49 years. So in Israel, in Eretz Yisrael, when you buy it for 49 years, how do you value a piece of property? How many yields do you have? So he paid so much because per yield, it was worthwhile for the buyer to buy it. So let's say the man lived in property for 5 years. We'll see. At this moment, we're not going to discuss it. So therefore, he deducts from the original sale price the years that the buyer benefited from the field, and then the balance, he has to pay him the balance, whatever is left. Jay, you got the calculation, okay? So now over here,
Rabbi, it's all pro rata.
Exactly. But it's all based on what the land was sold for. The land was only sold for 49 years because in there, so you can't sell the land for more than 49 years. Okay? Now, over here, it's phenomenal midrash at the beginning of Bahar. It says, person sells something to his fellow. Quotes a pasuk in Mishlei, says, Shomer HaKosev, Niva Lahon Ra'ayin. A person is overwhelmed because he wants to have possessions. Ra'ayin. Very often it's because he has a bad eye. Meaning you see somebody else has something and you're envious and you want what the other person has. V'lo yeda ki chesed yavenu. But the person doesn't realize that bad eye, which causes him to do many things, ultimately, although he believes he's gaining, ultimately he's going to have a loss. It's going to take him down a bad road. Says, who are we talking about? So the Midrash says, unfortunately, this pasuk is speaking about many people. That's what they have. Niva lahon ishra, the first person who had that bad eye, meaning whatever he had, he wasn't satisfied. He wanted more. Zeh Kayin. Story Kayin Hevel. Could you imagine? You have a whole world. Adam has 2 children. The world is not big enough for Kayin. Kayin has to divide the pie with his brother Hevel. So because he wanted it all for himself, that's why he killed his brother. That's what precipitated the strife between the two of them. Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ato nifhalto lirishus ha'olam. You were driven to inherit the whole world. You wanted it all for yourself. Chayecho, I swear on your life. Chesed yiloch. Ultimately, you're going to have nothing. Harvei v'lo yoda ki chesed yiveru. Umi ma hoyolo shenitalto ba'olam sheneba nova no tiaboretz. It says you will wander throughout the land. Throughout your life, you can be wandering. As it says that wherever Cain went, there were tremors, and people didn't want to be associated with him. He became like a pariah in the world. Dover acher, this is important. Niva lahon ishra, another example of this, is Ephron Achiti. Ephron, the one who sold the Moshe Machpelah to Avram Avinu. B'shoshem Eisasoro, Olach Avram sold Ephron, Sheim Kolo Esamoro. Avram went to Ephron to buy the cave. Omalo Ephron, tamely is the man, pay me the value, the purchase price. Omalo, Aretz Arba Meos Shekel Kes Bein Chamai, he says. Originally he said he'd give it to him as a gift. And then he says, and what's 400 shekel kesef? It's not a lot of money. Hischel Avram, Sover Sakesel Ephron. Avram was a rich man. He started to count out the money, and he created a pile of silver coins. Shnem Yishma Avram, El Ephron V'Yishkel Avram. Oma ben Moro. Alpi Shomer B'Chanina Kol Hashkol Shebdor Sloim Heim. Although normally when it speaks out shkolim, it's a certain denomination of silver coin or weight. Chutz mi elu. But the coins that Avram paid, what Ephron wanted from Avram, was the largest denomination of silver coin. They're called kantorim. These are large, like almost bullion. He counted out 400 pieces of silver bullion. Arbeis kantorim so Avram lefnei Ephron. Kevon, sho Ephron hakesef. When Ephron saw the type of wealth that Avram had, he stopped piling out literally a mound of silver. Niva v'nechpas. He was overwhelmed. He never saw anything like this. V'omar, b'mivchak foreinu k'foros meisecho. He said, I will give you the best. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He right away, all of a sudden, he sees Avram's capacity. He's impressed with the money because maybe he'll be able to get more out of him. You're going to have a loss. Listen to the law. What's the loss? Ephron. The man's a pagan. The man's a bad man. But you know something? You're going to lose because of your perception and your envy of others. Omer Rabbi Yehuda Halev Bar Sholom. Kol Ephron shekosu kan achlo notlas kesef mole. The word Ephron is written in its full spelling with the vav. It's not choser. V'zeh choser. The Yishkol Avram Ephron, when it says, and Avram weighed out the silver for Ephron, the word Ephron is written with the vav deleted. Choser vav ksiv. So you ask me, you say to a man who's a pagan, believes in nothing. In the Torah, your name normally is written in its full spelling, but because you're this envious person with a bad eye, an evil eye, we're going to take the vav out of your name. That's a loss. What kind of loss is this? You lose your wealth because your evil eye. Person's greedy and he buys a piece of property, ultimately takes him down. Okay, you see what your envy brought about. Ultimately, your financial loss. Over here we say, what is the loss? Because Ephron is normally written in its full spelling. At this moment, the vav is deleted. What's the shortcoming over here? So you can say one of two things. Even though a person himself doesn't appreciate the value of something, the script of the Torah, the narrative, is part of eternity. So to be part of eternity, because you facilitated the purchase of the Maras Machpelah, and we know the Torah is careful in every letter that it writes. And here it deletes a letter, it omits a letter to indicate something. That itself is an eternal loss. No material loss is the equivalent of that. Whether you value it or not, it doesn't make a difference. Here you could have been part of the eternal script, document forever, for all eternity. Because of your greed and envy, you're not going to be. That's one way to understand it. The other way to understand it was, and we said, Rabbeinu Bachya says, Ephron without the vav is ayin ra. It's a label. The Torah is labeling, you know what you are. For all eternity, you're labeled as a bad guy. Because of your greed, therefore you think you're this, you're that, you'll be known forever as that bad, as ayin ra. Because the numerical value of Ephron is 400, and ayin ra is 400, numerically speaking. That's Rabbeinu Bachya. So therefore, the deletion, the omission of the vav, is labeling him for what he is. This characteristic of his will be known for all eternity what he was. That's the loss which he's experiencing.